Someone is stealing from me, Joshua. I know it sounds crazy, but someone is taking my money. My grandmother said those words to me on a Sunday afternoon in April, sitting at her kitchen table with a stack of bank statements spread out in front of her like evidence at a crime scene. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack, despite what my parents always said about her getting confused, and she had asked me to come over because she needed help understanding her finances. I was 18, fresh out of high school, working part-time at a grocery store while I figured out what to do with my life. I did not know anything about banking or investments or financial fraud, but I knew how to use a computer, which was more than my grandmother could say, and I knew how to follow numbers from one place to another. Those two skills were about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family, because my grandmother was right. Someone was stealing from her, and that someone was my own parents. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Joshua Walker. I just turned 18, and I thought becoming an adult meant freedom. Instead, it meant finally being old enough to protect the people who could not protect themselves. This is the story of how I discovered that my parents had been draining my grandmother's pension for years, how I confronted them, and what happened when the truth finally came to light. I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, in a split-level house that my parents bought the year before I was born. The neighborhood was called Maple Heights, named for the rows of maple trees that lined every street, their leaves turning brilliant shades of orange and red every autumn. It was not a fancy neighborhood, but it was comfortable, safe, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and put up Christmas lights in December and waved to each other from their driveways without really knowing each other's names. Our house was the third one on the left on Oakwood Drive, a brown split level with white trim and a 2-car garage that my father was very proud of. He said the garage was why he bought the house in the first place. He needed somewhere to store his tools, his workbench, his collection of projects that he started but never quite finished. My mother used to joke that the garage was his real home, and the rest of the house was just where he slept. My father's name was Robert Walker, and he worked as an assistant manager at a car dealership called Eastside Motors on the other end of town. He had been there for almost 20 years, working his way up from the sales floor to a position with a desk and a nameplate and a small amount of authority over the other salesmen. He wore polo shirts with the dealership logo embroidered on the chest, and he always smelled faintly of car wax and coffee. He was not a bad man, or at least I did not think so at the time. He was just ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of father who showed up to your baseball games but spent most of the time checking his phone, who helped you with your homework but always seemed distracted, who told you he loved you but said it the same way he said, "Pass the salt" at dinner. My mother's name was Karen Walker, and she worked as a receptionist at a dental office called Bright Smiles Family Dentistry about 15 minutes from our house. She had been there even longer than my father had been at the dealership, ever since I was in elementary school. She answered phones, scheduled appointments, filed insurance claims, and dealt with the endless stream of patients who came through the door complaining about toothaches and cavities and the cost of dental work. She wore scrubs to work every day, the kind with cartoon teeth printed on them, and she always came home tired, her feet aching from standing behind the front desk for 8 hours straight. Together, my parents made enough money to pay the mortgage, keep food on the table, and occasionally take a vacation to somewhere warm during the winter. At least, that is what I always believed. That is what they told me whenever I asked about our finances, whenever I wondered how we could afford things that other families in our neighborhood could not. Looking back now, I can see the inconsistencies, the things that did not quite add up. My father drove a Cadillac, a sleek black sedan that he had bought 2 years ago and treated like a member of the family. He washed it every Saturday morning, buffed it until it gleamed in the sunlight, and got angry if anyone so much as touched the door handles without his permission. My mother drove a Honda CR-V brand new, with leather seats and a sunroof and a navigation system that she never figured out how to use. Together, those two cars must have cost close to $80,000. How did an assistant manager and a receptionist afford $80,000 worth of vehicles? Then there was the kitchen renovation. 3 years ago, my parents had completely gutted our kitchen and rebuilt it from scratch. New cabinets in a shade of white that my mother called eggshell, granite countertops in a pattern called Venetian gold, stainless steel appliances from brands I had never heard of, but that apparently cost a fortune. One of those fancy refrigerators with the screen on the front that shows you what is inside without opening the door. A 6-burner gas range that looked like something from a professional restaurant. My mother had shown it off to everyone who came to visit, bragging about the Italian tile backsplash and the farmhouse sink and the custom lighting fixtures that she had picked out herself. The contractor had been at our house for 6 weeks, and I overheard him telling my father that the final bill was just under $40,000. And then there was the cruise. Last summer, while I was working my shifts at the grocery store, stocking shelves and bagging groceries for minimum wage, saving up for a car of my own, my parents had taken a 2-week cruise through the Caribbean. They came back tanned and relaxed, with photographs of themselves standing in front of waterfalls in Jamaica and snorkeling in the crystal-clear waters of the Bahamas. They had purchased souvenirs at every port, carved wooden masks, hand-painted pottery, bottles of rum that they displayed on a shelf in the living room like trophies. My mother said the cruise had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but I later found out that they had booked a balcony suite, the kind that cost several $1,000s per person. Once in a lifetime, maybe, but definitely out of their price range. Every time I asked how they could afford these things, they would just smile and give me the same vague answers. They had been saving. They got a good deal. It was not as expensive as it looked. My father would tell me not to worry about money, that it was his job to provide for the family, that I should focus on school and let the adults handle the finances. My mother would pat me on the head like I was still a child and say that some things were not my concern. I believed them. Why would I not? They were my parents. They had no reason to lie to me. Meanwhile, across town, my grandmother lived in a very different world. Her name was Margaret Walker, though everyone called her Maggie, and she lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better days. The building was called Sunset Gardens, which was a cruel joke because there was no garden, and the only view from her window was the parking lot of a strip mall. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing. The elevator had been broken for as long as I could remember. The hallways smelled like industrial cleaner and something else, something old and tired. The smell of people who had been forgotten by the world. My grandmother's apartment was on the 3rd floor, number 312, at the end of a long corridor lit by flickering fluorescent lights. She had to climb the stairs every time she left the building, which was not often. Her knees were bad, her back was worse, and most days she stayed inside, watching television and waiting for someone to visit. The apartment itself was small and cramped, maybe 600 square feet if you counted the closets, filled with furniture that she had owned for decades. A floral print sofa that sagged in the middle from years of use. A wooden coffee table covered with water rings and scratches. A television set that was so old it still had a tube inside, the kind that took 30 seconds to warm up when you turned it on. Everything in that apartment was old and worn and tired, just like my grandmother herself. She wore the same clothes she had owned for 20 years, house dresses in faded patterns of flowers and birds, cardigans with missing buttons and fraying sleeves, slippers so worn that the soles had holes in them. I never saw her in anything new, anything that looked like it had been purchased in this century. When I was younger, I thought it was just her style, that old people preferred old things because they were comfortable and familiar. Now I know the truth. She wore those clothes because she could not afford new ones, because every penny she thought she had was being stolen from her. Before she could spend it, she ate canned soup for dinner most nights. Campbell's chicken noodle, cream of mushroom, tomato with rice. The cheap kind that cost 50 cents at the discount grocery store, the kind that tasted like salt and preservatives and nothing else. She would heat it up in a dented saucepan on her ancient stove, pour it into a bowl that had been her mother's, and eat it alone at her kitchen table while watching the evening news. Sometimes she would add crackers, the generic brand that came in a big box, to make it feel more like a meal. She said fresh food was too expensive, that she did not have the energy to cook real meals anyway. That soup was enough for an old woman who did not do much. She kept the thermostat at 62 degrees in the winter to save on heating bills. 62 degrees. In Cleveland, in January, she would wrap herself in blankets, layer sweaters over her house dress, drink hot tea constantly just to stay warm. Her hands were always cold when I visited, her fingers stiff and purple at the tips. I would hold them in mine and try to warm them up, and she would laugh and say she was fine, that she had survived worse winters than this, that the cold did not bother her anymore. She clipped coupons from the newspaper every Sunday, spreading them out on her kitchen table and sorting them by category: food, household items, personal care. She saved every plastic bag that came into her apartment, folding them carefully and storing them in a drawer by the sink. She saved rubber bands and twist ties and the little packets of ketchup and mustard that came with takeout food. She saved everything, because you never knew when you might need it, because waste was a sin, because every penny counted when you had so few of them. I visited her every Sunday. That had been our routine for as long as I could remember, ever since I was old enough to drive. I would come over after church, spend a few hours helping her with whatever needed to be done, and she would make me lunch, usually a sandwich, ham and cheese on white bread with a pickle on the side, and some homemade cookies that she had baked the day before. She made the cookies from scratch, chocolate chip, or oatmeal raisin, or peanut butter, even though baking exhausted her and made her back ache for hours afterward. She did it because she loved me, because feeding people was how she showed affection, because it was the only thing she could give me when she had so little else. I always assumed that her poverty was just the way things were for old people. She had grown up during the Depression, after all, or close enough to it. She was born in 1942, right in the middle of World War II, and her childhood had been shaped by rationing and scarcity and the constant fear that there would not be enough. She remembered what it was like to have nothing, to scrape by on whatever you could find, to save every penny, because you never knew when the next disaster would strike. Her frugality, I thought, was a habit left over from harder times, a quirk of her generation, nothing to worry about. But that was not the whole story. That was not even close to the whole story, because my grandmother was not poor by choice. She had a pension from my grandfather, who had worked at a steel mill called Cleveland Steel for 40 years before he died of lung cancer 8 years ago. My grandfather had been a foreman, a respected man who supervised dozens of workers and earned a good salary with excellent benefits. When he retired, he had a pension that was supposed to take care of him and my grandmother for the rest of their lives. And when he died, that pension transferred to her, a survivor's benefit that was supposed to ensure she never had to worry about money. The pension was not huge, but it was substantial. Almost $3,000 a month every month, deposited directly into her bank account on the first of the month. That should have been more than enough to live comfortably in that little apartment, more than enough for fresh food and new clothes, and a thermostat set at a reasonable temperature. more than enough to enjoy her final years without constantly worrying about money. Instead, she was eating canned soup and wearing clothes from the Reagan administration, and I had never stopped to wonder why. The day everything changed started like any other Sunday. I woke up late around 10 and lay in bed for a while scrolling through my phone, looking at social media posts from friends who were off at college, living exciting lives while I was still stuck in Maple Heights trying to figure out what came next. Then I took a shower, got dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, and drove across town to Sunset Gardens with a bag of groceries in the passenger seat. I always brought her groceries when I visited. Bread, milk, eggs, whatever was on sale that week. Canned goods that I knew she would eat, soups and vegetables, and fruit cocktail in heavy syrup. Sometimes a treat, like a small cake from the bakery section or a pint of ice cream that I knew was her favorite. She always protested that I was spending too much money on her, and I always told her it was nothing, that I was happy to do it, that she had taken care of me my whole life, and now it was my turn to take care of her. When I knocked on her door that Sunday, it took her longer than usual to answer. I could hear her shuffling across the apartment, her slippers scraping against the worn carpet, and when she finally opened the door, she looked different. Not sick, exactly, but worried, distracted, like there was something weighing on her mind that she could not shake. "Joshua." She smiled when she saw me, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Come in, come in. I need to talk to you about something." I followed her inside, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter like I always did. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the parking lot below. The television was off for once, and the silence felt heavy, ominous, like the air before a thunderstorm. My grandmother sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join her. Her hands were trembling slightly. I noticed a fine tremor that I had never seen before. Whatever she wanted to talk to me about, it was serious. That was when I noticed the bank statements. There must have been 24 of them, spread out across the table in neat rows, each one covered with yellow highlighter marks and handwritten notes in my grandmother's shaky script. She had been going through them, I realized, analyzing them, trying to understand something that did not make sense. "What is all this, Grandma?" She sighed heavily, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "I need your help, Joshua. Something is wrong with my money, and I cannot figure out what." "Wrong how?" She picked up one of the statements and held it out to me. Her fingers were cold when they brushed against mine, cold and thin and fragile like bird bones. "Look at this. This is from last month. See where it says I have $412 in my account." I looked at the number. $412.17. That was the balance in her checking account at the end of March. For a whole month, that was supposed to last her until the next pension payment arrived. That does not seem like very much. It is not. It is barely enough to pay my bills. The rent here is $900 a month. My medications cost another $200. Utilities, food, everything else. I am always scraping by, Joshua, always worried that I am going to come up short. I had known she struggled with money, but hearing her lay it out like that made it seem worse somehow. More real, more urgent. "Maybe you need to budget more carefully?" I suggested, not knowing what else to say. "Or we could look at your expenses, see where the money is going." She shook her head firmly. "That is what I have been trying to do. That is why I got all these statements out." She picked up another one. This one from the previous year. "Look at this one. Same time of year, same account, but this one says I had almost $3,000. I compared the two statements. She was right. The numbers were dramatically different. In the older statement, her balance was healthy, comfortable, the kind of balance that would let you sleep at night without worrying about money. In the newer statement, she was barely scraping by. The change was stark, undeniable. That is a big difference, I admitted. What changed? That is what I do not understand. I have not changed anything about my life. If anything, I have been spending less than I used to. I eat soup for dinner almost every night. I have not bought new clothes in years. I keep the heat so low that I have to wear 3 sweaters just to stay warm. She tapped the statements with a gnarled finger, her voice rising with frustration. Something is taking my money, Joshua. Something I did not authorize. I know it sounds crazy, but someone is stealing from me. I wanted to dismiss her concerns. I wanted to tell her that she was imagining things, that her memory was playing tricks on her, that there had to be a reasonable explanation. That was what my parents always said about her. After all, that she was getting confused, that she did not always remember things correctly, that you could not always trust what she said. Over the years, they had painted a picture of an old woman losing her grip on reality, forgetting appointments and misremembering conversations and making accusations that did not make sense. But looking at those bank statements, looking at the numbers right there in black and white, I could not dismiss anything. The evidence was right in front of me. The balance had dropped by more than $2,000 between one year and the next, and my grandmother had not changed her spending habits. Something was wrong. Let me take a look, I said. Do you have more statements? Going back further. She nodded and shuffled over to a cardboard box in the corner of the living room. Inside were years' worth of financial documents, statements and receipts and tax forms, all jumbled together in no particular order. She had never been very organized with paperwork. My grandfather had always handled the finances, but at least she had kept everything. I spent the next hour going through those statements, sorting them by date, creating a timeline of my grandmother's finances going back 3 years. And as I worked, the picture that emerged made my stomach turn. For the first few months, everything looked normal. Her pension arrived on the first of each month, just under $3,000. She paid her bills, bought groceries, maybe treated herself to something small, and by the end of the month she had a reasonable balance left over. The pattern was consistent, predictable, the financial life of a careful woman living within her means. And then, exactly 3 years ago, something changed. Starting in April of that year, there was a new entry on every statement, a withdrawal on the 15th of the month, always the same amount, $2,300. And next to each withdrawal, in the memo line, were the words, "Transfer to linked account." I counted the withdrawals, 36 of them, one every month for 3 years, 36 times $2,300. That was $82,800. Almost $83,000 had been taken from my grandmother's account without her knowledge or consent. Grandma, my voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and hollow. Did you set up an automatic transfer 3 years ago to send money somewhere else every month? She looked at me blankly. What? An automatic transfer, where the bank takes money from your account and sends it to another account on a schedule. I do not even know what that means, sweetheart. I just deposit my pension check and pay my bills. I do not know how to do anything fancy with computers. The only reason I have that laptop is because your parents gave it to me when they got a new one. But these transfers have been happening every month. Someone set them up. Someone with access to your account. She shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with confusion and fear. I did not set up anything. I have not changed anything about my account in years. Not since your grandfather died. I stared at the statements, my mind racing. Someone had access to my grandmother's account. Someone had programmed automatic transfers to drain almost all of her pension every single month. Someone had been stealing from her for 3 years, taking $83,000 while she ate canned soup and wore threadbare clothes and worried constantly about money she did not know she was supposed to have. Who would do something like that? Who had the ability, the access, the opportunity? The answer came to me slowly, reluctantly, like a nightmare you do not want to wake up from, because waking up means admitting that it is real. 3 years ago, April, I thought back to that time, trying to remember what was happening in our family. My grandmother had been sick, I recalled. A urinary tract infection that had gotten into her blood, something called sepsis that could be deadly in older people. She had been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks, hooked up to 4 antibiotics and monitors, drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. She had been confused and disoriented when she came home, not quite herself for several months afterward. The infection had affected her brain somehow, made it hard for her to concentrate, hard for her to remember things. My mother had stepped in to help, visiting her every day, bringing her groceries, handling her affairs while she recovered. She had called it taking care of Mom, and made it sound like the most natural thing in the world, handling her affairs. I remembered my mother talking about it at the time, how she had taken over my grandmother's bills and paperwork because my grandmother was too weak to manage them herself. She had said it was temporary, just until Grandma got back on her feet. She had said it was what any good daughter would do. But what if it was not temporary? What if my mother had used that opportunity to do something else? Something she never told anyone about? I did not want to believe it. The idea was monstrous, unthinkable. My mother, stealing from her own mother? My mother, who went to church every Sunday and sang hymns with her eyes closed like she meant every word. My mother, who volunteered at the food bank at Christmas and talked about how important it was to help those less fortunate. My mother, who told me constantly about the importance of honesty and integrity and always doing the right thing. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. But then I thought about the Cadillac and the Honda CR-V, the $40,000 kitchen renovation, the Caribbean cruise with the balcony suite, all those luxuries that never quite made sense on my parents' salaries, all that money that had to come from somewhere, $83,000 over 3 years. That was about $27,000 a year, enough to make car payments, enough to pay for a kitchen renovation, enough to fund a lifestyle just slightly beyond their means, a lifestyle they could never have afforded on their own. Grandma, I said carefully, 3 years ago when you were sick, did Mom help you with your bank account? She thought about it for a moment, her forehead creasing with effort. Yes, she did. I was so confused after the hospital. The medications they gave me made everything foggy. I could not remember what day it was. Could not remember if I had eaten breakfast. Karen said she would take care of things until I felt better. She had me sign some papers so she could access my account if I needed her to. What kind of papers? I do not remember exactly. Something from the bank. She brought them to my apartment one day when I was still recovering. She said it was so she could pay my bills if I was not able to, so she could make sure I did not miss any payments. I thought she was being helpful. I thought she was taking care of me. I felt sick, physically sick, like I might throw up right there on my grandmother's kitchen table. My mother had used my grandmother's illness, her confusion, her trust, to gain access to her bank account. And then she had set up automatic transfers to steal from her every single month for 3 years. My own mother, the woman who had raised me, who had tucked me into bed at night and packed my school lunches and told me she loved me every single day. She was a thief. She was stealing from a defenseless old woman who could not even understand what was happening to her. I need to make a phone call, I said, standing up so fast that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I will be right back. I stepped out into the hallway of Sunset Gardens and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the worn carpet. Somewhere down the hall, a television was playing, the sound of canned laughter from a sitcom that seemed impossibly out of place in this moment. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call my mother right then and there, to confront her, to demand an explanation. I wanted to hear her voice, wanted to give her a chance to explain, to tell me that there was some misunderstanding, that she had not done what the evidence clearly showed she had done. But another part of me knew that I needed more evidence first. I needed to prove that what I suspected was actually true before I made any accusations. I needed to find out where that money was going. I went back inside and sat down at my grandmother's ancient laptop, the one she used mainly to check email and look at photographs of the grandchildren who lived far away. The credit union had an online banking system, and my grandmother had her login information written on a post-it, notes stuck to the refrigerator. The username was her email address. The password was my grandfather's birthday, March 17th, 1940. The website loaded slowly on the old computer, each page taking what felt like minutes to appear. But eventually I got in, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The transfers were all there, listed in her transaction history going back 3 years. Every month, on the 15th, $2,300 moved from her checking account to another account at the same credit union. The receiving account was identified by a number, but there was a name associated with it, visible if you clicked on the transaction details. The name was Karen Walker, my mother. I sat there for a long time, staring at that name on the screen. My mother's name, attached to 3 years of theft, attached to $83,000 stolen from her own mother. I thought about all the things my parents had said about my grandmother over the years, how she was getting confused, how she did not always remember things correctly, how you could not always trust what she said. I had believed them. I had accepted their characterization of her without question, because why would my parents lie to me about my grandmother? But they were lying. They had been lying for years, not just about the money, but about her. They had been painting her as confused and unreliable specifically, so that no one would believe her if she ever figured out what was happening. They had been covering their tracks, building a narrative that would protect them if their crime was ever discovered. And they had used me to do it. Every time I dismissed my grandmother's concerns about money, every time I told her she was probably just forgetting things, every time I repeated my parents' assessment of her mental state, I was helping them get away with theft. I was an unwitting accomplice to their crime. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I doubled over in my chair, gasping for breath, fighting back tears that burned my eyes. My grandmother came over and put her hand on my shoulder, not understanding what was wrong, just knowing that her grandson was in pain. "Joshua, what is it? What did you find?" I could not answer her. Not yet. I needed a moment to compose myself, to figure out how to tell an 81-year-old woman that her own daughter had been robbing her blind for 3 years. When I finally looked up, she was watching me with those watery blue eyes that had seen so much in their lifetime, eyes that deserved better than this. "I found where the money is going," I said. "I found out who has been stealing from you." "Who?" I took a deep breath. "It is Mom. It is Karen. She set up those transfers 3 years ago when you were sick. She has been taking $2,300 from you every single month, $83,000 total." The color drained from my grandmother's face. She sat down heavily in the chair beside me, her hand gripping the edge of the table like she needed something to hold on to. "Karen? My Karen. I am so sorry, Grandma. I am so sorry." She did not cry. I expected her to cry, but she did not. She just sat there, very still, staring at some point on the wall that I could not see. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I gave her everything," she said. When she was young, when she needed help, I gave her everything I had. I paid for her wedding. I helped with the down payment on their first house. I babysat you for free so she could go back to work. I loaned them money when they were struggling, never asked for it back." She paused, her voice cracking. "And this is how she repays me. By stealing from me, by leaving me to eat canned soup while she goes on cruises. I do not know why she did it. I cannot explain it. But we have the proof now, Grandma. We know what happened. We can stop it." She turned to look at me, and there was something new in her eyes, something hard and determined, replacing the confusion and fear that had been there before. "What do we do?" That was the question I had been asking myself ever since I saw my mother's name on that account. What did we do? We had options, I knew. We could go to the police and file a report. We could hire a lawyer and sue for the money back. We could confront my parents directly and demand an explanation. Each option had consequences. Each option would change our family forever. There was no way to undo what my mother had done. No way to go back to the way things were before I found out the truth. All we could do was decide how to move forward. "I think we need to go to the credit union," I said. "We need to talk to someone there, get all the documentation, understand exactly what happened, and then we need to decide whether to involve the police." My grandmother nodded slowly. "And your mother? Do we talk to her?" "Eventually, but not yet. Not until we have everything we need. If she knows we found out, she might try to cover her tracks somehow. Delete records, move money, make it harder to prove what she did." It felt strange, talking about my mother like she was a criminal, like she was someone we needed to protect ourselves from. But that was what she had become, whether I wanted to accept it or not. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And now we had to treat her accordingly. We went to the credit union the next morning, first thing when the doors opened. I called in sick to my job at the grocery store, the first time I had ever done that, and drove my grandmother across town to the branch where she had been a member for over 30 years. The branch was located in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop, a modest building with tinted windows and a faded sign out front. Inside, it looked like every credit union I had ever seen. Beige carpet, artificial plants in the corners, a row of teller windows along one wall, and a cluster of desks along the other where the loan officers and account managers worked. We asked to speak with someone about a problem with my grandmother's account, and after a short wait, we were escorted to the desk of a woman named Mrs. Patterson. She was middle-aged, with graying hair and glasses on a chain around her neck, and she had the patient, slightly tired expression of someone who had spent decades dealing with other people's financial problems. "What can I help you with today?" she asked, gesturing for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk. I let my grandmother explain, at least the beginning of it. She told Mrs. Patterson about noticing that her money was disappearing faster than it should, about asking me to help her look into it, about finding the mysterious transfers that had been happening every month for 3 years. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew more serious as the story went on. She typed something into her computer, her eyes scanning the screen, her frown deepening with every passing second. "I see the transfers you are talking about," she said. $2,300 every month, going to another account here at the credit union. "Mrs. Walker, do you remember authorizing these transfers?" "I did not authorize anything," my grandmother said firmly. "I did not even know they were happening until my grandson showed me." Mrs. Patterson typed some more, clicking through screens, pulling up documents. "According to our records, these transfers were set up 3 years ago by a joint account holder. It appears that a family member was added to your account at that time, with full authorization to make changes and move funds." "A joint account holder? I do not have a joint account holder. My husband passed away 8 years ago. I have been on my own since then." Mrs. Patterson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. The joint account holder listed here is Karen Walker. Our records indicate she is your daughter. She was added to your account in April of 3 years ago, with your signature on the authorization form. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I watched my grandmother's face as the information sank in, as the confirmation of what we already suspected became official, documented, undeniable. "When was she added to my account?" my grandmother asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Patterson checked her screen. "April 15th of 3 years ago. There is paperwork on file with her signature and yours. It appears to have been done during a time when you were recovering from an illness. The notes in our system say you wanted to give your daughter access to help manage your affairs during your recovery." I was confused then. The medications they gave me in the hospital made everything foggy. I do not remember signing anything. I do not remember agreeing to any of this. "I understand. Unfortunately, we have your signature on the paperwork, so from the bank's perspective, the authorization was valid." Mrs. Patterson paused, choosing her words carefully. "However, if you believe that you were coerced or that you did not fully understand what you were signing, that could potentially be grounds for further investigation." "What kind of investigation?" "If you suspect financial elder abuse, which is what this might constitute, you have the option to file a police report. The authorities can investigate whether the addition of the joint account holder and the subsequent transfers were done fraudulently. They can interview witnesses, review documents, determine whether any laws were broken." Financial elder abuse. The words hung in the air like a verdict. That was what my mother had done. Not just theft, but financial elder abuse. A crime against one of the most vulnerable people in her life. Her own mother. I asked Mrs. Patterson for copies of everything. The authorization paperwork, the transfer records, the account statements going back 3 years. She printed them out for us. A thick stack of documents that felt like evidence in a trial that had not happened yet. The paper was warm from the printer, and I held it carefully, like it might explode in my hands. As we were leaving, Mrs. Patterson called out to us, "Mrs. Walker, I am very sorry this happened to you. If it helps at all, you should know that you can remove your daughter as a joint account holder at any time. Just say the word, and we can process that paperwork today." My grandmother looked at me, then back at Mrs. Patterson. "Yes, please do that. I want her removed immediately. I do not want her to have access to my money ever again." We filled out the forms right there in the lobby, my grandmother signing her name with a hand that shook only slightly. When it was done, when Karen Walker was officially no longer able to touch my grandmother's money, I saw something like relief cross her face. A burden lifted, a door closed, but another door was opening, and I had no idea what lay on the other side. We drove back to my grandmother's apartment in silence. The stack of documents sat on the seat between us, a paper monument to my mother's betrayal. Every few minutes, I would glance over at my grandmother, trying to read her expression, trying to understand what she was feeling. But her face was blank, closed off, like she had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, where I could not follow. When we got back to Sunset Gardens, I helped her up the stairs to her apartment. Her legs were shaking, and she had to stop on each landing to catch her breath. The climb had never seemed to bother her before, but today every step looked like an effort, like the weight of what we had discovered was pressing down on her physically as well as emotionally. Inside the apartment, she sat down in her armchair and closed her eyes. I made her a cup of tea, the same way my grandfather used to make it, with 2 sugars and a splash of milk. She took it from me without opening her eyes and held it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "What are you thinking, Grandma?" She was quiet for so long that I thought she might have fallen asleep. But then she opened her eyes and looked at me, and I saw that she was crying, not sobbing, not making any sound at all, just tears rolling silently down her cheeks and dripping onto the collar of her house dress. "I am thinking about the day Karen was born," she said. "I was 23 years old. Your grandfather was so nervous he could barely stand up straight. The labor took 18 hours, and by the end of it, I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open. But when they put her in my arms, when I looked down at that tiny face, I felt something I had never felt before. Love. Pure, unconditional love. I thought I would do anything for her. I thought she would never, ever hurt me. Grandma, I fed her from my own body. I changed her diapers. I walked the floors with her when she had colic, pacing back and forth for hours while she screamed. I sacrificed everything for her, my sleep, my time, my dreams. I gave up a job I loved so I could stay home and take care of her. And I never regretted it, not for 1 second, because she was my daughter, because loving her was the most natural thing in the world." She set down the teacup and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And now this. Now I find out that the child I gave everything to has been stealing from me, has been letting me suffer so she could have nice things, has been lying to me for years." She shook her head slowly. "How does that happen, Joshua? How does a mother's love turn into this?" I did not have an answer. I did not think there was an answer. Some questions are too big, too painful, too complicated for any response to feel adequate. I do not know, Grandma. I do not understand it either. I keep trying to find the moment where I went wrong. Was it something I did when she was young? Did I spoil her too much? Not discipline her enough? Did I fail her somehow, as a mother? And this is the result. This is not your fault. You did not make her do this. She made her own choices. But where did those choices come from? People do not just wake up one day and decide to steal from their mothers. There has to be something inside them, some seed of cruelty that grows over time until it blooms into something like this. Where did that seed come from? I thought about my mother, about the woman I had known my whole life. Had there been signs, warning signals that I had missed? Looking back, I could see small things. Her obsession with money and status, the way she always wanted to keep up with the neighbors, the little comments she made about people who had more than we did, the way she talked about my grandmother sometimes, with barely concealed frustration, calling her difficult and dramatic and impossible to please. The way she would come home from visiting Sunset Gardens and pour herself a glass of wine and complain about how depressing it was there, how she could not wait to get back to her own life. I had thought those were normal complaints, normal frustrations. Everyone vented about their parents sometimes, did they not? But now I wondered if it was something more, if my mother had been cultivating a resentment for years, telling herself that my grandmother did not deserve what she had, that she was owed something for all the inconvenience of having an elderly parent. I think some people just have a broken place inside them. I said finally, a place where empathy should be but is not, and they learn to hide it, to pretend to be normal, but it is always there, waiting for the right opportunity to show itself. You think Karen has a broken place? I think she convinced herself that what she was doing was okay, that you did not need the money, that she deserved it more than you did. And once she convinced herself of that, once she told herself that story enough times, it became true to her. It became justified. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. That is a terrible thing to think about your own child. I know, but I think you might be right. That night, I went home to my parents' house for the last time. I did not know it was the last time then, but looking back, I can see that everything was different from the moment I walked through the front door. The house felt like a crime scene to me now, every nice thing in it tainted by the knowledge of how it had been paid for. The granite countertops in the kitchen, paid for with my grandmother's pension. The leather couch in the living room where my parents sat watching television, paid for with my grandmother's pension. The Cadillac in the garage and the Honda in the driveway, paid for with my grandmother's pension. $83,000 worth of lifestyle, stolen from an old woman who ate canned soup for dinner because she thought she could not afford anything better. My parents were in the living room when I came in, watching some reality show about people buying houses. They looked so normal, so innocent. My mother in her scrubs, her feet up on the ottoman after a long day at work. My father in his polo shirt, a beer in his hand, laughing at something on the screen. They had no idea what I knew. No idea that their secret was about to come crashing down around them. "Hey, honey," my mother called out without looking away from the TV. "Did you have a nice day?" I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I could feel the stack of documents in my bag, the evidence that would change everything. I could still walk away. I could pretend I had not found anything. Could pretend my grandmother was just confused like they always said. I could keep my family intact, keep the peace, avoid the confrontation that I knew was coming. But then I thought about my grandmother eating canned soup. My grandmother wearing clothes from 20 years ago. My grandmother keeping her thermostat at 62 degrees because she thought she could not afford to be warm. "I went to see Grandma," I said. "Oh, how is she? Did she remember to take her medications this time? You know how she forgets things." The casual dismissal in my mother's voice, the automatic assumption that my grandmother was confused and unreliable, made something inside me snap. "She is fine. More than fine, actually. She is sharp as a tack, Mom. Sharp enough to notice that someone has been stealing from her." My mother finally turned to look at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something fast and hard, but it was gone before I could identify it. "Stealing? What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the $83,000 that has disappeared from her bank account over the past 3 years. I am talking about the automatic transfers that have been draining her pension every month, sending money to an account with your name on it." The room went very quiet. On the television, people were arguing about crown molding, their voices suddenly absurd in the heavy silence. My father sat up straighter, setting down his beer. "Joshua, what the hell is going on? Ask your wife. Ask her about the joint account she set up when Grandma was sick and confused. Ask her about the paperwork she had Grandma sign without understanding what it meant. Ask her where she got the money for the kitchen, the cars, the cruise to the Caribbean." My mother stood up slowly, her face pale but composed. "Joshua, honey, I think there has been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding. I saw the records at the credit union. I have copies of the transfer history. $2,300 every month for 3 years, going straight from Grandma's account to yours. Do not try to deny it, Mom. The evidence is right there in black and white. It is not what you think. Then explain it to me. Explain why you have been stealing from your own mother while she eats canned soup and wears clothes from the 80s. Explain why she has been living in poverty while you renovate your kitchen and take cruises. Explain it to me, Mom, because I really want to understand." My mother took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something colder, harder, more calculating. That money was going to come to us eventually. When she passes, we are her only heirs. I was just accessing it early, using it when we needed it, instead of waiting until she was gone. Accessing it early? She is alive, Mom. She is alive and struggling while you spend her money on things she cannot afford for herself. She does not need that much money. She is an old woman living alone in a tiny apartment. What was she going to spend it on? Fancy dinners? Vacations? She barely leaves her apartment. We needed the money more than she did. We had debts, Joshua, credit cards, the mortgage. We were drowning. We were about to lose everything. So you stole from your mother to pay your credit card bills? It is not stealing when it is going to be ours anyway. It is just early access, an advance on our inheritance. I stared at her. This woman I had known my entire life. This woman I thought I understood. But I did not understand her at all. I did not understand how anyone could justify what she had done. How anyone could look at a struggling elderly woman and see nothing but a source of income to be exploited. An advance on your inheritance. I repeated the words slowly, trying to understand how anyone could say them with a straight face. She is not dead, Mom. She is alive. She is your mother, and you have been treating her like an ATM. You are being dramatic, just like she is. I swear, the two of you are exactly alike. Do not compare me to her. I am nothing like her. I am nothing like you either, apparently. My mother's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means that I actually care about people. It means that I do not steal from family members and then make excuses for it. It means that I have a conscience, which apparently you do not. You have no idea what we have been through, Joshua. No idea what it is like to be buried under debt, to feel like you are drowning, to wake up every night in a cold sweat wondering how you are going to pay the bills. Your grandmother has that pension sitting in her account, just sitting there, not being used, and we are struggling to keep our heads above water. How is that fair? Fair? You want to talk about fair? I could feel my voice rising, could feel the anger building inside me like pressure in a sealed container. What is fair about leaving your mother in poverty while you take cruises? What is fair about letting her eat canned soup so you can have granite countertops? What is fair about any of this? She has lived long enough, my mother said, and those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. She is 81 years old. How many more years does she have? 5, 10, and then all of that money comes to us anyway. I was just accelerating the timeline. Accelerating the timeline? Do you hear yourself? You are talking about your mother's death like it is a business opportunity, like she is just an obstacle between you and your inheritance. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sure as hell sounded like you were saying you wished she would hurry up and die so you could have her money. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time since I had started confronting her, she looked uncertain, caught, like she had said something she knew she could not take back. My father finally stood up. He had been sitting on the couch this whole time, watching the argument unfold, saying nothing, but now he looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen before, something between disgust and resignation. Karen, that is enough. Robert, stay out of this. No, Joshua is right. What we did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when we started, and I know it is wrong now. I went along with it because I am weak, because I wanted the nice things, and I did not want to think about where they came from. But I cannot listen to you justify it anymore. I cannot listen to you talk about your mother's death like it is something to look forward to. You are taking his side, our own son, against his own mother. This is not about sides. This is about right and wrong. And we were wrong, Karen. We were so wrong. My mother stared at him like he had sprouted a second head. I do not think she had expected him to turn on her. She had probably assumed that they would present a united front, that they would talk their way out of this together the way they had talked their way out of everything else. But my father was done talking. He looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. I am sorry, son. I am so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have said no. But I did not, and now we all have to live with the consequences of that. Sorry is not enough, Dad. Sorry does not give Grandma back the years she spent struggling. Sorry does not fix what you did. I know it does not. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But it is all I have to offer. That and the promise that I will do whatever I can to make this right. My mother laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Make it right? How exactly do you plan to do that, Robert? We do not have $83,000. We do not have anything. Everything we have was bought with that money. Then we will sell things. We will sell the cars. We will sell the furniture. We will do whatever we have to do. Over my dead body. Karen, my father's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. We do not have a choice. Either we pay Margaret back, or we go to prison. Those are the only options. And personally, I would rather sell a few cars than spend the next 10 years in a cell. The fight seemed to go out of my mother then. She sat back down on the couch, her shoulders slumping, her defiance crumbling into something that might have been despair. Fine, she said. Fine. We will pay her back. But I want you both to know that this is not justice. This is extortion. This is blackmail. No, Mom. I walked over to where she sat and looked down at her. This woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me, who I thought I knew. This is mercy, and it is more than you deserve. I walked out of the house without looking back. I could hear my mother calling my name, my father trying to calm her down, the sounds of a family disintegrating behind me. But I did not stop. I did not turn around. I got in my car and drove through the dark streets of Maple Heights, past the houses with their Christmas lights and their perfect lawns, past the life I had thought I understood. I drove to my grandmother's apartment because that was where I needed to be. She was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting in her armchair by the window, looking out at the parking lot of the strip mall. The television was on, playing some old movie, but the volume was turned down so low I could barely hear it. She looked older somehow, more fragile, as if the events of the past 2 days had aged her years in just hours. It is done, I said, sitting down on the worn floral sofa across from her. I confronted them. They admitted everything. What did she say? She said the money was going to come to her eventually anyway. She said you did not need it. She said... I shook my head. It does not matter what she said. Excuses are not explanations. Justifications are not apologies. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. I do not want her to go to jail, Joshua. What? After everything she did? She is still my daughter. Whatever she has done, she is still my child. I carried her in my body for 9 months. I held her when she cried. I watched her grow up and get married and have you. I cannot erase all of that because of what she did. I cannot pretend she is a stranger. But Grandma, I know what you were going to say. She deserves to be punished. She deserves to face consequences for what she did. And maybe she does. But I do not want to spend my last years fighting with my own family. I do not want to die with this anger in my heart. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that my mother deserved consequences, real consequences, for what she had done. But I looked at my grandmother's face, at the exhaustion and the pain and the complicated love that still lived there despite everything, and I understood. This was not my decision to make. The money was hers. The betrayal was hers. And the choice about how to respond was hers too. What do you want to do then? I want the stealing to stop. It has stopped. I want her off my account. She is off my account. My grandmother paused, gathering herself. And I want my money back. Whatever she can repay, I want it back. Not all at once. I know that is not possible. But monthly, the same way she took it. A payment plan. Yes, a payment plan. $2,000 a month until the debt is cleared. That will take years, I know. But at least it will be something. At least I will see that she is trying to make amends. And if she refuses, then we go to the police. Then we file charges. But I want to give her one chance, Joshua. One chance to do the right thing. One chance to be the daughter I thought she was. I nodded slowly. It was not the justice I wanted, but it was the justice my grandmother wanted, and that was what mattered. Okay, we will do it your way, but I am going to be there for every step of it. And if she tries anything at all, I will be ready. I know you will. My grandmother reached out and took my hand. You are a good boy, Joshua. A good man. I am proud of you. The word proud hit me harder than I expected, because that was what I had always wanted from my parents. To make them proud, to hear them say that I had done well, that I was becoming the person they hoped I would be. And now I was hearing it from my grandmother, in the context of standing up against the people who had raised me. It was not the way I had imagined becoming a man, but maybe it was the way it had to be. The confrontation with my parents happened 3 days later, in my grandmother's living room. I had called them and told them that Grandma wanted to discuss the situation, that she had a proposal for how to move forward. My mother tried to refuse, but I told her that if she did not show up, my grandmother was prepared to go to the police immediately. That got her attention. They arrived together, my father looking uncomfortable in his polo shirt, my mother looking defiant in her Sunday dress. They stood in the doorway of my grandmother's apartment like they were afraid to enter, like they were vampires waiting for an invitation. "Sit down," my grandmother said. Her voice was calm, controlled, stronger than I had heard it in years. "We have things to discuss." They sat on the floral sofa, side by side, their bodies tense and their faces guarded. I stood by the window watching, ready to intervene if necessary. My grandmother began by laying out the facts. The amount stolen, the time frame, the method. She presented it clearly, without emotion, like a prosecutor making a case. And my parents listened, unable to deny any of it, unable to offer any defense beyond the weak justifications they had already tried. Then she presented her proposal. "You will repay me," she said. "Every dollar you took, $2,000 a month until the debt is cleared. That will take approximately 42 months. If you miss a payment, if you are even 1 day late, I will file a police report and pursue charges for financial elder abuse. Do you understand?" My mother started to speak, but my grandmother held up a hand. "I am not finished. You will also sign a document acknowledging what you did, a confession. Joshua has prepared it. You will sign it in front of a notary, and I will keep it in a safe place. If you ever try to harm me or manipulate me again, if you ever try to access my finances without permission, I will release that document to the authorities and to everyone we know." "You cannot be serious," my mother said. "A confession? That could be used against us in court. That could destroy our lives." "That is the point, Karen." My grandmother's voice was ice cold. "You need to understand that this is not a negotiation. This is me giving you a chance to avoid criminal prosecution. A chance you do not deserve, but one I am offering anyway, because despite everything, you are still my daughter." My father spoke up, his voice tight. "Margaret, please. We made a mistake. We were desperate. Can we not just put this behind us? Move forward as a family? A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is bouncing a check. What you did was systematic theft. Over 3 years. 36 separate crimes, Robert. 36 times you could have stopped her. 36 times you chose to enjoy the money instead. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. A choice you made over and over again." The silence stretched out like a wire about to snap. I watched my parents, waiting to see what they would do. Would they accept the terms? Would they try to negotiate? Would they refuse entirely and force us to go to the police? In the end, it was my mother who spoke first. "Fine," she said, the word coming out like she was spitting poison. "Fine. We will pay you back. We will sign your confession. But I want you to know that this is not justice. This is extortion. No, Karen, this is mercy." My grandmother stood up, slowly, her joints protesting the movement. "Extortion would be demanding more than you took. Justice would be you in prison. This is me choosing to forgive you, even though you do not deserve it. This is me choosing family over fairness." She walked over to where my parents sat and looked down at them. My mother, defiant but defeated. My father, ashamed but silent. "You are not welcome here anymore," my grandmother said. "I do not want to see you. I do not want to hear from you. All I want is the money deposited into my account on the 15th of every month. That is all you are to me now. A monthly payment." My mother stood up abruptly. "Fine. We are leaving. Come on, Robert." My father followed her to the door, but he paused before leaving. He looked back at me, standing by the window, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something. An apology, maybe. An explanation. Some acknowledgement that he knew they had done wrong. But he just shook his head and walked out, closing the door behind him. That was the moment I became an adult. Not when I turned 18. Not when I graduated from high school. Not when I got my first job, or my first apartment, or my first taste of independence. It was that moment, standing in my grandmother's apartment, watching my parents walk out the door, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The first few weeks after the confrontation were the hardest. I had to figure out how to live a completely different life than the one I had been living. I had to pack up my room in my parents' house, the room I had slept in since I was a baby, and move everything to my grandmother's tiny apartment. I had to tell my friends that I was no longer living at home, without explaining why. I had to adjust to a new routine, a new address, a new way of seeing the world. The hardest part was the silence. I was used to a house full of noise, the sound of the television playing in the living room, my father's footsteps on the stairs, my mother's voice calling me down for dinner. At my grandmother's apartment, everything was quiet. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors, but my grandmother herself barely made a sound. She moved slowly, carefully, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. She spoke in a low voice, as if she was afraid of disturbing someone. At night, lying in my narrow bed in the spare room, I could hear her breathing in the next room, the soft rhythm of an old woman sleeping alone. I miss my parents. I did not want to miss them, but I did. I missed the sound of my father's voice, the way he would call me sport and ruffle my hair like I was still a little kid. I missed my mother's cooking, the way she would make my favorite meals on my birthday and pack me lunches with little notes tucked inside. I missed the feeling of being part of a family, of belonging somewhere, of having people who loved me unconditionally. But then I would remember what they had done, and the missing would turn to anger, and the anger would turn to something else, something harder and colder that I did not have a name for. They had stolen from their own mother. They had let her suffer so they could live comfortably, and they had lied about it, not just to me but to everyone, for years. How could I miss people like that? How could I love people who were capable of such cruelty? I did not have answers to those questions. I still do not. I just knew that I could not go back. I could not pretend that everything was normal, that the truth had not come out, that we could be a happy family again. Some things, once broken, cannot be fixed. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. My grandmother helped me through those early weeks. She did not push me to talk about my feelings, did not try to counsel me, or comfort me, or tell me that everything would be okay. She just let me be. She cooked dinner every night, simple meals that we ate together at her small kitchen table. She watched television with me in the evenings, old shows from the 80s and 90s that made her laugh and shake her head at how young everyone looked. She told me stories about my grandfather, about their courtship and their wedding and their 50 years together before he died. She made me feel like I was not alone. One night, About 2 weeks after I moved in, I could not sleep. I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and I found my grandmother sitting at the table, staring out the window at the parking lot below. "Grandma, what are you doing up?" She turned to look at me, and I could see the tears on her cheeks, silver in the dim light from the street lamps outside. "I was just thinking," she said, "about Karen, about what she did." I sat down across from her, the glass of water forgotten. "Are you okay?" "No." She shook her head slowly. "No, I am not okay. I do not think I will ever be okay. But I will survive. That is what we do, Joshua. We survive. I am so sorry, Grandma. I am sorry I did not figure it out sooner. I am sorry I believed them when they said you were confused. That is not your fault. You were just a child. They were your parents. Of course you believed them." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I believed Karen too, you know, when she said she wanted to help me, when she said she was worried about me. I believed her because she was my daughter, because I loved her, because I could not imagine that she would ever hurt me. Do you still love her?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. My grandmother did not answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. God help me, but yes. She is my daughter. I carried her inside my body. I watched her take her first steps, say her first words, grow into a woman. That love does not just go away because she did something terrible. It is still there, underneath the anger and the hurt and the betrayal. It will always be there. How can you love someone who did that to you? I do not know, but I do." She squeezed my hand. "That is why I gave her the chance to make it right. Not because she deserves it. She does not. But because I need to believe that she can be better. I need to believe that the daughter I raised is still in there somewhere, underneath all the greed and the selfishness and the cruelty. What if she is not? What if this is who she really is? Then I will have to learn to live with that. But I am not ready to give up on her yet. I do not know if I ever will be." That conversation stayed with me for a long time. I thought about it during the days, while I was stocking shelves at the grocery store or studying for my certification exams. I thought about it at night, lying in my narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside. My grandmother still loved her daughter, even after everything. She was still hoping for redemption, still believing in the possibility of change. I did not share that hope. I did not believe that my mother could change, that she could become a different person than the one who had stolen from her own mother for 3 years without remorse. But I admired my grandmother for believing it. I admired her capacity for forgiveness, even if I could not understand it. The payments started arriving on schedule. $2,000 on the 15th of every month, deposited directly into my grandmother's account. I checked the balance for her every time, making sure the money was there, making sure my parents were keeping their end of the bargain. So far, they had not missed a payment. Whether that was because they were genuinely trying to make amends, or because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not, I could not say. I did not care about their motivations. I only cared about the results. With the extra money coming in, my grandmother's life began to change. She started buying fresh food instead of canned soup, vegetables and fruits, and meat that she cooked herself. She turned the thermostat up to 70 degrees and stopped wearing 3 sweaters inside. She bought new clothes, nothing fancy, just practical things from the department store downtown, but they were new and clean, and they fit her properly. She looked healthier, more alive, like a plant that had finally been given enough water after years of drought. She also started going out more. She joined a book club at the library, a group of women her age who met every other Wednesday to discuss novels and drink tea. She started taking walks in the park when the weather was nice, slow laps around the pond where children fed the ducks. She even signed up for a computer class at the community center, determined to learn how to use that laptop properly, so she would never have to depend on anyone else to check her bank account again. Watching her bloom like that, watching her reclaim her life after so many years of deprivation, was the best thing to come out of this whole terrible situation. She was happy. After everything, after all the suffering and betrayal and heartbreak, she was finally happy, and I had helped make that happen. That was 6 months ago. In that time, a lot has changed. I moved out of my parents' house the day after the confrontation. I could not live there anymore, not knowing what I knew, not surrounded by things bought with stolen money. My grandmother offered me her spare bedroom, the one she used for storage, and I accepted. We cleared out the boxes together, set up a real bed with a mattress and frame, hung some posters on the walls. It is small, barely big enough for the bed and a dresser, but it is home. I got a job at a local bank, entry level, nothing glamorous. Teller work mostly, helping people with deposits and withdrawals and the occasional problem with their accounts. It felt right, somehow, spending my days protecting people's money after everything that had happened. Every time I helped an elderly customer, every time I explained a fee or flagged a suspicious transaction, I thought about my grandmother. I thought about how no one had protected her, how she had been vulnerable and alone, how someone should have noticed what was happening long before I did. I was good at the job, too. I caught a fraud attempt in my second week, a guy trying to cash a forged check. He had come in wearing a nice suit, talking confidently, acting like he did this every day. But something about his behavior felt off to me. The way his eyes kept darting to the exit. The way his smile did not reach his eyes. The way he fumbled slightly when I asked for his identification. I called my manager over, and she took one look at the check and called the police. It turned out the guy had been running the same scam at banks all over the city, and they had been looking for him for months. My manager said I had good instincts. She said not everyone could spot a con artist, but I had a gift for it. I did not tell her that I had learned to spot liars by growing up with them. I did not tell her that my own mother had taught me everything I needed to know about deception, just by being who she was. I am studying for my certification now, hoping to move up to a position with more responsibility. The bank has a program for employees who want to advance, and I have been taking night classes at the community college, learning about finance and accounting and business administration. It is hard balancing work and school and taking care of my grandmother, but I do not mind. I like having something to work toward. I like knowing that I am building a future, one class at a time, one paycheck at a time. My grandmother is doing better now. The money is coming in again, her full pension plus the monthly payments from my parents, and she can finally afford to live the way she should have been living all along. She bought new clothes for the first time in years, blouses and cardigans in colors that make her eyes look brighter. She eats real food now, fresh vegetables, and actual meat instead of canned soup and crackers. She keeps the thermostat at 70 degrees and does not worry about the heating bill. But more than that, she seems lighter somehow, happier, like a weight has been lifted that she did not even know she was carrying. She laughs more now. She tells stories about my grandfather, about their life together, about all the things she wants to do with whatever time she has left. She is planning a trip to Florida to see her sister, the first vacation she has taken in over a decade. I told her I would drive her, and she said she would like that. I am proud of her. I am proud of the strength she showed when everything fell apart. I am proud that she chose mercy over revenge, even though revenge might have been justified. She is a better person than I am, a better person than my mother will ever be. As for my parents, I have not spoken to them since that day in my grandmother's apartment. My mother has called me dozens of times, left voicemails begging me to forgive her, sent emails explaining all the reasons why what she did was not as bad as it seems. I have ignored every single one. I am not ready to read them. I do not know if I ever will be. I am not ready to forgive her. I do not know if I ever will be. The woman I thought was my mother, the woman who raised me and taught me right from wrong, that woman does not exist. She was a performance, a mask worn to hide the person underneath. And the person underneath is someone who would steal from her own mother without remorse, who would justify it and excuse it and never truly accept responsibility for the harm she caused. Maybe someday we will have a relationship again. Maybe someday I will be able to look at her without seeing the lies and the betrayal and the cruelty. But that day is not today. That day is not tomorrow. That day may never come at all. What I have learned from this experience is that family is not just blood. Family is action. Family is showing up when people need you, protecting the vulnerable, doing the right thing even when it is hard. My mother failed that test. My father failed it too, by going along with what she did, by enjoying the fruits of her theft without questioning where they came from. But I did not fail. When my grandmother needed someone to protect her, I was there. When she needed someone to uncover the truth, I found it. When she needed someone to stand beside her as she confronted the people who had wronged her, I did not flinch. That is what family means to me now. Not shared DNA, not holiday dinners and birthday cards, but the willingness to fight for the people you love, even when the enemy is someone you thought you could trust. I am Joshua Walker. I was 18 years old when I discovered that my parents were stealing from my grandmother, and I chose to do something about it. Not everyone would have made that choice. I know that. It would have been easier to look the other way, to convince myself that it was none of my business, to let adults handle adult problems. But some things are too wrong to ignore. Some betrayals are too deep to pretend you did not see. My grandmother gave me a gift when she asked me to help her with her bank account that Sunday afternoon. She gave me the chance to be the person I always wanted to be. Someone with integrity. Someone with courage. Someone who does the right thing even when it costs them everything. I hope I never stop being that person. I hope that no matter what happens in my life, no matter what challenges I face or temptations I encounter, I will always remember what I learned from this experience. That trust is precious and fragile. That the people closest to you can sometimes hurt you the most. And that standing up for what is right is always worth the cost. My parents taught me that by negative example, by showing me exactly what not to do, exactly who not to become. And for that, in a twisted way, I suppose I should thank them. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.